Did you ever think of what Hitler, Charles Manson, Jim Jones, Gandhi, Charles de Gaulle, Winston Churchill, maybe Abraham Lincoln, what do they have in common? Do you get repulsed the moment you even hear me ask this question, implying that maybe they have something in common? But we all know that they do have something in common. And what they have in common, at least in the vocabulary of today's leadership talk, is the notion of charisma. Here's a concept that virtually a short while ago, certainly a century ago, was hardly part of our language, which has emerged as part of our daily lexicon. Everyone sort of assumes they know what charisma is about. These figures, for good or for bad, share some commonality around this notion of charisma. We attribute to each one of them this characteristic of charisma. Now, the sociologist Max Weber developed the notion and elaborated the notion of charisma. And essentially, for Weber, charisma lied was the power the individual had because of some exceptional gift, almost some exceptional sense of calling, some exceptional sense of morality, some exceptional, almost divine gift on the one hand. Charismatic leaders were the ones with vision, prophetic vision. A charismatic leader knew how to minister and attract followers. There is, in the notion of charismatic leader, a strong sense of leader and follower. And there's also a strong sense of hypnotic appeal. There is almost a sense of mass following. Now, immediately, this is going to raise at least some signs of caution. Do we want to go down that flag? In fact, what happens with charismatic leaders? Do we still remain reflective? Or are we always reflexive? There's the danger of this hypnotic leader, as one author recently called it. There is this danger of leaders and followers. This notion that somehow you are so enveloped, so trapped, so caught up by this leader that you follow almost anyway. So charisma isn't all that it seems, is it? It's a slippery slope. Sure, charisma is wonderful to mobilize people, but it also can create this sense of absolute following and groupthink. So when we go out there and we recruit leaders and say we want just charisma, that's not really enough, is it? We want more than charisma. You know, in our culture, we talk as charisma as a key notion of leadership. Whenever I ask my students to name me a few leaders, they always come up with somehow, at least the American students, the same list. Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, FDR, sometimes Mother Teresa. And what did they say of each one of them? They were charismatic. They were charismatic. They talk about Martin Luther King's charisma in terms of his speech-giving ability. They talk about Lincoln, and FDR. But take a look at what we really value about them. Take a look at Martin Luther King. We talk of King as being a charismatic leader, as a person who inspired people. Surely he did. But we ignore constantly his capacity to manage. We ignore the brilliance of the man as a manager. And we ignore the brilliance of the man in terms of his political competence, his capacity to create coalitions, to move things ahead. He had a vision. He had a vision built on the vision that his people and many people had for 100 years before. But what he was capable of doing is executing, delivering on that vision. And somehow in our culture, when we remember King, we say he was charismatic, he was inspirational. But for him, leadership was a day in, day out, hard, grinding job of getting things done. Take a look at Lincoln. Everyone talks about Lincoln as being charismatic. Doris Curry Goodwin, in a wonderful book, which I think is a superb book on leadership, called The Team of Rival, presents an image of Lincoln as charismatic, etc. But more importantly, you have this notion of a man that comes into Washington, D.C., that the only thing his cabinet has in common is that they know that each one of them should be president, that he shouldn't be. A man that comes into Washington, that sustains his coalition, that's able to figure out where people are coming from, that's able to mobilize people. A man who has his general in McClellan feeling that he's serving the wrong president and practically telling the president what to do. Lincoln's genius was in his tactical, pragmatic, political competence. Lincoln's genius was in his capacity of getting things done, his capacity to be proactive. The same thing's true for FDR. If ever there was a proactive leader, a pragmatic proactive leader, it was FDR. Mother Teresa, she builds an organization. She's inspired, but she builds an organization. What's my point? My point is, if you're waiting for charisma injection, if you want to hire people on the basis of charisma only, then you've got a very narrow notion of leadership. If you're going to just think that charisma what's important, superheroes what's important, inspiration what's important, you're hiring and something that's rare. It's there. It's something that's also not that critical. You want people that can get things done. You want a leader that can execute. And these type of leadership skills we can train people in. They're not a function of personality. They're not a function of birthright. They're a function of what people learn. People learn to execute. People learn to get things done. Therefore, people learn to lead.